Hi, I'm Jamye Wooten. I am the founder of Cllctivly. Cllctivly is a social impact organization we launched in 2019 to be a resource for those that seek to find, fund, and partner with Black social change organizations in Greater Baltimore. A few things inspired me to pursue this work. I'm a former director of the Collective Banking Group, so working with over 200 churches in faith-based economic development. And most recently, in 2015, after the murder of Freddie Gray, was one of the co-founders of Baltimore United for Change. And that was a coalition of grassroots organizations that came together in response to the murder of Freddie Gray. And it was during that time that I created a skills bank. And the skills bank was an on-ramp for folks who weren't necessarily on the ground, but wanted to plug in. So I'm a mental health provider, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, I'm a graphic designer, I'm a web developer. How might I plug in? So again, we had over 260 individuals and organizations join our skills bank. We used the skills bank internally as a coalition, and the goal of Cllctivly, when I launched in 2019, was to make a more faith-forward platform, invite all Black-led organizations in Greater Baltimore to participate. And also, what came up during that time was foundations didn't necessarily know who was on the ground doing the work. So we launched with our first phase of this asset map directory, where we have now over 140 Black-led organizations listed by their area of focus and neighborhood. We look at bringing sort of community wholeness and wellness through connectivity. So part of what we're doing is trying to connect the dots and connect folk. Often say community organizations work in silos. This fragmentation leads to duplication, and duplication leads to wasted resources, our time, talent, and treasure. So part of what we're trying to do is bring folks together. There's a lot of organizations doing great work in Baltimore, and we hoped with our first phase with this asset map directory that it would give the ability for organizations or individuals to begin to do their own due diligence. Say you saw an issue in the community and you said, I want to start a mentoring program. You can come to the website and you begin to search, say, well, maybe there's 10 mentoring programs that already exist within the community, and maybe there's ways to partner, collaborate, or even find your own niche. Maybe something's missing in the ecosystem. So we really want to foster greater collaboration. Part of the work as well is narrative power and narrative change. We know that some of the stories that lead to headlines in our nightly news don't always sort of amplify the best of Black Baltimore. So part of what we're doing is amplifying and telling the stories of these Black-led organizations and how they're serving. And then from the resource mobilization side, we know that Black-led organizations only receive about 2% funding. So again, we want to raise awareness and make sure we're mobilizing resources so that our organizations have what they need to survive and thrive as they serve Baltimore. In response to the pandemic, the first thing we did was we put out a survey to our network to kind of see where our Black-led organizations were. And, it wasn't a surprise to us. We knew the data prior to COVID. Some of the racial wealth data said it would take the Black community 227 years to close the racial wealth gap. So we knew we didn't really need a lot of data, that we needed to go to work right away. So we launched the Baltimore Black-led Solidarity Fund with the goal of providing $5,500 micro grants. We have surpassed that. Now we've done over $300,000 in no strings attached micro grants. And part of our pivot during that time was we mainly focused on social impact, mission-driven organizations, but we also began to look at some of our brick and mortar restaurants as not just places where goods and services are sold, but it's also community anchors. And so one of our first grants was to Terrence and Terra Cafe. And so we began to also support Black-owned businesses as well during COVID. And of course, because of COVID, the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, there was a lot of interest in Black-led organizations and Black businesses. So in that sort of way, it's been an influx of support for organizations like Cllctivly. I would say the greatest accomplishment is really just hearing the stories, hearing the amazing work that Black folks are doing. Again, stories that are often that go unnoticed, untold throughout Baltimore's sort of corporate media. So it's just great to hear on the ground how people are making amazing impact in community. One of the things that we do is a monthly micro grant. So community-based organizations can submit a 2 to 3 minute video, and the community at large vote. So we've had over 60,000 people vote for the monthly micro grant winners. And so, through all the voting, it's open for about 2 weeks. I thought it was getting kind of competitive. I wasn't necessarily trying to create a competitive space for this grant making process, but it was trying to ease the burden of applying for grants. So I started to sort of knit that approach, but then I started hearing the stories from folks who said, I didn't win, but I won. Like the level of visibility they were receiving, that even if they didn't win the monthly micro grant, they had new donors, new volunteers, or just new opportunities. So I'm excited about the level of visibility that Black-led organizations are receiving throughout Baltimore. A long-term vision for Cllctivly, I always say, the first 2 years, again, we launched in 2019. So I always said the first 2 years was about relationship building. So we're going to spend 2 years just deepening the level of trust we have in community. And then we would begin to get more intentional in year number 3. So we're headed to year number 3. So we'll launch Collective Design, which is a relationship building cohort, again, trying to dig deeper into building the type of relationships, the type of trust we need to foster greater collaboration amongst Black-led organizations. So we'll cover sort of the systems and structures that have historically separated us, these ideas of competition versus collaboration, scarcity versus abundance, and deal with some of the trauma that even community-based organizations, folks who are doing justice work, sometimes come to the table with. Like, again, the goal is how do we come together and pool our resources. And I think to do that well, you have to, again, foster trust and then build the type of relationships you need to sustain. We've been asked to come to several other cities. I wanted to get through these first 3 years first before we venture out to do that. So that's still an option to go up to other cities and build out this sort of framework of resource mobilization and narrative change. But right now, I'm committed to making sure Baltimore is my #1 priority. My legacy, I don't think much about it other than making sure that the generation behind us won't have to start from ground zero, that we begin to build a sort of platform and institution, an endowment, and have the resources available for them to be able to start where we left off and continue to move this work forward. So I'm really thinking about sort of making sure we have the institutions that give young Black people the ability to be self-determined and to follow their dreams. And really, our approach is what we call the Black Genius approach, this sort of asset-based approach where we deal with the Black genius. Often in the social service sector, it's this sort of deficit approach of what's wrong within the community. We're at risk, all the sort of negative connotations about Black folk and community. So we really want to tell the amazing stories of the work that's happening and make sure that our young folks in the next generation have the resources they need to thrive. I think there's no better time than the present to really boost this sort of work in Baltimore. Of course, there's a long history of disinvestment and underdevelopment within the Black community, a history of redlining, and the pandemic really pulled back the curtain of these gross inequalities. And so I think language is shifting. People are beginning to talk about equity and justice in ways in which we haven't had the language before. So I'm excited about this moment. I hope we take it serious so that our children and our children's children don't continue to confront the same issues that we're confronting today.